American physicist, Nobel Prize winner Richard Feynman. If a person decided to build a perpetual motion machine, he would be faced with a prohibition in the form of a physical law. In contrast to this situation, in biology, there is no law that would assert the obligatory finiteness of the life of each individual. In 2023, my publication was published about the fundamental possibility of a person achieving immortality. It received a large number of responses, so I decided to describe how this can be implemented in practice in more detail. And although what you will see may sometimes seem like a plot from a science fiction horror movie, I am sure that if humanity ever really cares about gaining physical immortality, it is unlikely to come up with another option. Moreover, I decided to conduct this extraordinary experiment on myself, and perhaps I will become the first immortal person on planet Earth. I believe that the main way for a person to become immortal is approximately the same as that already used by some existing, essentially immortal organisms on Earth. Namely, the transfer of the main features of the organism from the obsolete part, which subsequently dies, to its new, younger part. With the help of this method of regeneration, some mollusks, hydras, and jellyfish can theoretically live forever and not age at all, although an accidental death is still possible for them. But how can this be done technically? And what if at some point you have two copies of the same person? And won't the destruction of the old copy be classified as murder? We will be trying to find answers to all these questions. For practical human immortality, we first need to determine which part of the human body is responsible for its self-identification and learn to transfer this part to a new basis to regenerate it. As studies show, only a certain part of our nervous system is responsible for our self-identification. It includes reticular formation, limbic system, prefrontal cortex, parietal and temporal lobes, cerebellum. The larger part of the human nervous system serves other functions of our body, such as regulation of internal organs, heart, lungs, stomach, and intestines, processing sensory information from the senses, vision, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, coordination and execution of various movements, maintaining homeostasis, a stable internal state of the body temperature, balance of fluids, electrolytes, as well as other parameters. And these functions are not particularly important for determining personal characteristics. We will describe those parts of the nervous system that play a major role in human self-identification in more detail. The reticular formation is a complex network of neurons located in the central part of the brainstem, quite small compared to the cerebral hemispheres or cerebellum. It is considered one of its most ancient parts, as it appeared in the early stages of brain evolution. Critical in regulating basic vital functions, such as breathing, heart rate, maintaining wakefulness and the transition between sleep and wakefulness. It acts as a filter for sensory signals, preventing the brain from being overloaded with information, and may regulate the transmission of pain signals to the brain. The limbic system is also one of the oldest parts of the brain, although it is more new compared to the reticular formation in terms of evolutionary history, as it is associated with more complex social interactions and cognitive abilities. It also occupies only a small part of the total brain volume. It is well developed in mammals, where it is involved in learning, memory, and emotional behavior. Directly affects personality traits such as emotional stability, reaction to stress and relationships with other people. Helps strengthen memories based on emotional significance. Regulates hormones that affect mood and emotions. Plays a key role in the formation of new memories and learning. Is important for spatial memory and the transfer of information into long-term memory. Prefrontal cortex makes up about 10% of the volume of the entire brain and is a specialized area within the neocortical structure. It is responsible for regulating complex cognitive processes, including planning and decision-making, social interaction, and self-control. Associated with personality traits such as responsibility, impulsiveness, and adaptability. It is involved in retaining and manipulating information in a short time period to perform cognitive tasks. Parietal lobes occupy about 5% of the brain volume and are also part of the neocortex. Important in spatial orientation, processing sensory signals, and integrating information to perceive and understand the world around us. This can influence aspects of personality such as openness to new experiences and adaptability, helps control attention, and is involved in storing semantic memory. Temporal lobes, part of the neocortex responsible for processing auditory information, understanding language, visualizing and perceiving emotions, and forming memories. Cerebellum makes up about 10% of the brain's volume, but contains more than 50% of all neurons due to its densely packed structure. The cerebellum is traditionally thought to be involved in motor coordination, but recent research suggests that it may also influence cognitive function and emotional regulation, and the formation of procedural memory such as skills and habits, shared with the basal ganglia. The total number of neurons in the human nervous system ranges from 85 to 100 billion. But to recreate the personality on a new basis, less than a third of them will be needed. Moreover, it is quite possible that you will not have to worry much about structuring new brain tissue. The brain is amazingly plastic and will form the structures it needs on its own. Human brain plasticity, or neuroplasticity, refers to the brain's ability to change and adapt in response to new experiences, learning, or recovery from injury. This is a fundamental property of the brain that allows neurons in different areas to form new connections, strengthen existing ones, and sometimes create new neural pathways. It is currently the subject of many researches. Science knows unique cases of brain neuroplasticity. For example, in the year 2007, during a medical examination of a 44-year-old Frenchman, it was accidentally discovered that only a thin outer layer of his brain remained, and the inner part was practically absent. It is completely incomprehensible how a person with such a diagnosis remained alive without any mental disabilities. He was the father of 2 children and worked in a government agency. It turned out that the Frenchman's IQ reaches 75 points, which, in general, is the norm. This case also illustrates how important functions can be redistributed between different areas of the brain, allowing a person to maintain normal functioning even after large parts of the brain have been reduced or removed, while retaining intellectual abilities and personality traits. That is, the brain can continue to function normally even if its mass is reduced from the usual approximately 1,400 grams to 600 grams. It is most important to give the brain enough time to adapt. One of the main tasks of the brain is to record a certain amount of its direct and indirect influence. That is, determining the boundaries of the native organism and everything included within these boundaries, and also the creation in its internal structure of an image of a given organism and the world around it. The brain can add new parts of the body to its sphere of influence and adapt them, including even some elements of a non-biological nature, such as artificial organs or tools. The formation of the human brain is a long process that begins before birth and continues throughout life. However, the main stages of brain development are completed by a certain age. The most intensive growth and development of the brain occurs in the first years of life. During this period, the basic neural connections that are necessary for basic physical and cognitive functions are formed. Most children take the mirror test between 18 to 24 months of age, which is considered to indicate the beginning of the development of self-awareness. During adolescence, the brain undergoes significant rewiring, including pruning neural connections that are less used and strengthening those that are actively used. This process helps optimize brain functioning according to the environment and experiences. The brain continues to develop and change throughout adolescence and early adulthood. Development of the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for planning, decision-making, and self-control, is thought to be complete at around age of 25. This is the last area of the brain to reach maturity, but the brain's ability to change in response to experiences that persist throughout life, allowing the brain to adapt and learn throughout the years. After about 30 years, a person begins the process of brain aging, due to the gradual loss of neurons and a decrease in the number of neural connections, synapses. its volume and weight decrease, and blood flow in the vessels supplying the brain deteriorates. Changes also occur in neurotransmitters, chemicals that transmit signals between neurons. The formation of new neurons, neurogenesis, occurs in limited numbers, especially in areas of the hippocampus, which plays a key role in memory and learning. At a functional level, this may manifest itself in changes in cognitive functions such as memory, learning ability, and processing speed. But is it possible in principle to copy the brain, since this will lead to the simultaneous existence of at least two personality options? Two ego of the same person? Wouldn't this be a serious contradiction by ideological and even legal standards? Looks like no. Science has long known of cases where two or even more personalities somehow coexisted in one brain. The question of how many personalities can be present in a person's brain at the same time usually refers to the consideration of a phenomenon called dissociative identity disorder. This is a rare mental condition, formerly known as multiple personality disorder, in which a person exhibits two or more distinct personalities or identities, alters, each with their own individual behavioral traits, memories, ways of thinking and interacting with the world around them. These parts of identity may have different gender, age, nationality, character, mental abilities, and react differently to certain situations. Despite the emergence of new personalities, the basic personality, bearing the person's original first and last name, remains among them. The number of personalities within a person can increase over the years. Researchers first noticed this phenomenon at the end of the 18th century. In 1791, German psychotherapist Eberhard Gmelin described a case of changing personality in a 21-year-old German girl. She developed a second personality that spoke French and claimed to be a French aristocrat. Of our contemporaries, one of the most famous people diagnosed with multiple personality in the history of psychiatry is Billy Milligan. His body was inhabited by 24 personalities, 10 of which were main, and the rest were undesirable. In medicine, DID is considered to be an extreme manifestation of dissociation, a psychological defense mechanism in which a person begins to perceive what is happening to him as if it were happening to someone else. This mechanism is useful because it allows a person to protect himself from excessive, intolerable emotions. But in case of excessive activation of this mechanism, dissociative disorders appear. And since a person experiencing dissociation is not completely detached from reality, he, according to this theory, in some cases can create within himself another personality that could better cope with a given situation. Different identities can alternately seize control over a person's behavior. Switching between different personalities can occur in response to stress, environmental triggers, or even spontaneously. But in addition to switching, there may also be passive influence, in which part of the identity does not take executive control, but one way or another interferes with functioning. Research from Stanford University has shown that dissociation affects certain brain circuit dynamics, particularly in areas associated with self-perception and emotional responses. This involves patterns of electrical activity in the brain that can even be stimulated to induce dissociative states under controlled conditions. Another phenomenon known to science when two personalities coexist in the same volume of the brain is people with fused skulls, craniopagus. In 2006, the Hogan couple gave birth to two twin girls, Krista and Tatiana, in Canada. In the womb, they fused their heads together and were born in this form. Craniopagus, that is, Siamese twins connected at the head, is an extremely rare phenomenon. But Krista and Tatiana are unique even among craniopagus. The brain of one sister is connected to the brain of the other. Parents have no doubt that each of the girls is a separate person with an individual character, tastes, and temperament. But it is quite possible that in their self-identification, in addition to feeling like a separate person, there is also the ability to recognize themselves as one part, is too far from our everyday experience. In the documentary chronicle with Krista and Tatiana, it is clearly visible that the sisters almost do not communicate with each other, although they willingly talk with other people. For example, Krista silently takes the cup and gives it to Tatiana because she understood that Tatiana was thirsty, and Krista was closer to the cup. The sisters never have to ask each other out loud. They know what is needed every time. From everything discussed above, we can conclude that the plastic human brain allows several, in one way or another, connected personalities to get along simultaneously. So, in order to make a specific person practically immortal, we must learn to transfer his personal characteristics living in the neural network of his brain to a new neural environment that is grown on his own brain. In other words, we must create an artificial Siamese twin, a fused-in brain with the original, wait until the personality characteristics and memory of the original move into the new neural network, and then separate the twins and dispose of the original. Growing additional brain tissue should be done on the open brain of a person who is in an artificial coma with the participation of his stem cells, with some controlled stimulation of their growth. This is a very difficult matter, but in principle feasible. That is, in essence, we must grow a slightly smaller copy of it on the existing old, but still living and normally functioning brain. And therefore, if a person wants to become practically immortal, he must be prepared for the fact that for more than 10 years, considering modern technologies, he will be in a state of artificial coma with an open skull. At least a third of his brain structure will be grown on his brain, into which they will try to transfer his personality characteristics and memory. I believe that this movement can be activated by artificially suppressing certain parts of the original brain, and the brain, using its plasticity, will begin to transfer the functions of these parts to the newly formed part. It is quite possible that additional methods will have to be invented to stimulate such a transfer, given that the body in a state of artificial coma cannot function in its usual way. It is also necessary to develop ways to test the results of transferring personality characteristics and memory to new tissue. That is, at some stage there will be two similar personalities in the double brain, and to test the success of the transfer process, the still working organs of vision, hearing, and speech, and come up with a way of verifiable communication with the newly formed copy when these organs finally stop functioning. After the necessary and sufficient part of the personality has been formed in the new parts of the brain, a special commission, including close relatives and friends of the patient, will have to come to the conclusion that this is approximately the same personality through a series of tests, currently existing in duplicate. But the main thing is that the person whose personality was copied in this way must admit this. That is, somehow inform the commission that he is approximately the same and is ready to continue to exist in such an updated form. Based on the results of all these examinations, a legal procedure is subsequently carried out to recognize for the renewed personality, essentially a piece of flesh about 400 grams, for all the rights and family ties belonging to the old personality, and a decision is made on euthanasia and disposal of the old part of the body in accordance with previously formalized agreement of that matter. The newly formed copy of a person's personality will probably exist in the form of a piece of brain matter in a state of artificial coma for quite a long time, until at the next stage of scientific progress for a way to grow or attach the rest of the body to it for a more comfortable life. Of course, not everyone will agree to such a rather complex procedure of immortality, which is repeated several times every approximately 50 years. Initially, perhaps some millionaire or a hopelessly ill person. But after a number of successful results and improvements, the process of copying the brain and transferring personal characteristics and memory can be significantly simplified and accelerated. And people gaining immortality, at will, can become a completely routine procedure, just as joint replacement has now become a routine procedure. If you want to know in which parts of your brain your I, your ego, is most concentrated, and how much it would cost in today's prices to transfer your I to a new basis, that is, to make you practically immortal, write to us and we will send you a list of questions for testing. Subscribe to this video if you want to follow the development of our project. Every 6 months, we plan to update information on the process in the following video stories. As part of the personality transfer procedure described above, it will be necessary to grow at least 20 billion additional neurons. But with modern technologies, only a few million of them can be grown in a month. Of course, this is too slow, and the practice of growing neurons is constantly improving. Currently, induced pluripotent stem cells, iPSCs, that generate neurons, are produced by reprogramming adult somatic cells to create neurons identical to those found in the brain. Through specific cultural and chemical conditions, differentiation, neurons specialized for different brain functions can be obtained. Growing neurons is a cutting-edge field of science, with many university and government centers around the world actively involved. Here are just a few. These studies involve the development of neural interfaces to connect the brain with a computer, the creation of implants, the development of new approaches to treating diseases using stem cells, and the use of neuronal transplantation technologies. The creators of artificial intelligence, AI, use a concept called artificial neurons, or neural networks, which are inspired by the workings of the human brain but implemented in a very different way. Instead of biological neurons, which are brain cells, AI uses mathematical models to simulate their functionality. These artificial neurons are not physical objects. They are software code and algorithms in computers. An artificial neuron is based on a mathematical model that receives signals from one or more inputs, processes them using activation functions, and produces an output signal. Inputs are usually numbers, and each input is weighted by a certain coefficient, which changes as the network trains and determines whether the neuron will fire or not, simulating the threshold at which the neuron sends a signal further down the network. During neural network training, the weights of the inputs are adjusted so that the network can better perform tasks such as pattern recognition, language processing, making complex predictions, or making decisions based on inputs, similar to how the human brain processes information. The idea of transferring a person's brain into a computer, or mind uploading, is a subject of interest in the fields of science and fiction. But modeling and simulating the biological structure of the brain, consisting of billions of neurons and trillions of synapses that interact in extremely complex networks, in a digital environment with the precision required to convey consciousness and personality, requires enormous computing power that is not yet available. However, research in this direction is underway, and it is possible, at least partially, that artificial neurons will also be used to treat certain diseases, improve brain function, and prolong human life.